Welcome to the Healthy Heart Show, where we pull back the curtain on conventional medicine and dive into the root causes of cardiovascular health. If you are concerned about high cholesterol, high blood pressure, heart attacks, stroke, or atrial fibrillation, this is the place for you. We will provide natural heart information that will help you prevent, treat, and reverse any ailment, leaving pills and procedures out of the picture. Here are your guides to holistic heart health, board-certified cardiologist and Amazon best-selling author, Dr. Jack Wolfson, and natural heart doctor, naturopathic physician, Dr. Lauren Latanza. Hello and welcome to the Healthy Heart Show podcast. I am your host today, Dr. Lauren Latanza, naturopathic physician here at Natural Heart Doctor. We have an awesome guest that we're bringing here to you today. I'm very excited to have him on. We have Dr. Stephen Hussey. He is a chiropractor and functional medicine practitioner. He attained both his doctorate of chiropractic and his master's in human nutrition and functional medicine from the University of Western States in Portland, Oregon. He is a health coach, speaker, and the author of two awesome books on health, The Health Evolution, Why Understanding Evolution is the Key to Vibrant Health and Understanding, and Understanding the Heart, Surprising Insights into the Evolutionary Origins of Heart Disease and Why It Matters. Welcome to the show, Dr. Stephen Hussey.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
So I mentioned to you before, we do share a very similar perspective on cardiovascular health to us here at Natural Heart Doctor, because you really take an understanding of ancestral health and apply that to a lens to better understand and better educate your patients. So I think that that's really awesome and really why I wanted to bring you on so we can further educate our patients.
Cool. Yeah. It should be an awesome conversation.
So we often talk, kind of just jumping into it, we often talk a lot about the heart as the pump that drives blood around the body. And you have a really interesting perspective on this. And there's some science that really elaborates on why this may or may not be true, that the heart is the sole driver. So if you could elaborate on this for us.
For sure. Yeah. So when studying an organ and how it maybe gets disease, it's important to understand the true function of that organ. And so I, have this special interest in the heart because of my own health history. And so looking into all this information about the heart, and I had no filter, I would just consume any information I could find. I found a lot of things contrary to what, is the conventional wisdom around the heart and heart disease, but also what, we're directly taught in medical school as far as what the function of the heart is. And so it turns out that there is a large body of evidence that suggests that the heart is not the main mover of blood in the body, and that a heart the size of ours, it would be impossible for it to create enough energy and force to move the blood throughout the entire body. And if people are interested, there is an entire book on the subject, including my book, but also there's a book on specifically that by Dr. Franco, or Dr. What's his name? Franco First. He's kind of championing this idea. And so if we think about that, if we accept that idea, then the natural question is, well, how does the blood move, right? Mm-hmm. If it's the heart not forcefully pumping it. And so this requires us to learn a little bit about water, which, we're all told that we're 60, 70, some people say 80% water. There's lots of water in our bodies. However, most of that water in our bodies is not a liquid state. It's in more of a gel-like state. And this is called the fourth phase of water, or exclusion zone water, or structured water. And this is a phenomenon that has been confirmed by many scientists over the years, whether it's James Clegg or Mae-Wan Ho, or Gilbert Ling or Gerald Pollack. Mm-hmm. Lots of different scientists have confirmed that this does in fact happen in the body. And so when we look at, there are places in the body where there is liquid water, the blood being one of them, lymphatic fluid also being one, and the cerebrospinal fluid all have this more liquid type water. But in the cells and most other spaces, it's more of this gel state, this fourth phase of water. Now, within the blood, there is, it turns out that water has these specific or unique properties in that it can hold energy. And when it holds energy, and it gets next to a water-loving surface, a hydrophilic surface, it actually structures itself. It rearranges the molecules of the water, and it structures itself into a specific orientation that is more like a gel state. You could think like Jello, or when you make a bone broth and you put it in the fridge and it kind of forms a gel. Like that's what we're thinking here. And so it turns out that all biological surfaces are hydrophilic, and that there's lots of water in the body. And so on the lining of the arteries, the blood is about half water. On the lining of the arteries, we get this structured water if we have intact, healthy water and lining of the artery. And so this does two things for us. If we get the lining of the artery that has structured water on it, structured water is also called exclusion zone water because it excludes anything that's not it. So it's very, only small hydrated ions of minerals can penetrate it. Anything bigger than those cannot. Even the smallest protein in the blood, albumin, cannot penetrate this water. And so if you look at all the things that are bigger than that albumin, like lipoproteins in red blood cells and bacteria and all the different blood elements, nothing can get through that water. So this water acts as a kind of protection for the lining of the artery, which we know is a big deal because people deal with trying to prevent atherosclerosis or hardening of the artery or damage to the lining of the artery. So water plays a key role in the protection here. The other thing that water does, which is more pertinent to the question of what moves blood, is that because of the way the structured water forms, the structured water, this gel-like water on the lining of the artery, is more electronegative. And it pushes some of the hydrogen from the water out into the middle of the lumen of the artery, the middle of the artery. And so that creates a charge separation. We have this very negative spot and a very positive spot. And I hope people are thinking, well, what else has a charge separation? Well, a battery, right? We always put the positive and negative end in particular spots to charge something, right? And it turns out that experimentally, if you put, the wires from a light bulb into the positive and negative parts of this water, it will actually light the light bulb because it creates energy. Okay. And so in the lining of the artery, this charge separation creates the work of a battery and does the work of moving the blood, moving fluid, right? And so they've proven this in Dr. Pollack's lab with experiments in just tubs of water with hydrophilic tubes, but they've also confirmed it in chick embryos and different animals that this does indeed happen. The water or the blood does indeed move on its own through this fourth phase water mechanism. And they've done experiments where they stop the heart of the animal and the blood continues to move after that happens. So this is how blood flows. And so then hopefully people's natural question is, well, why is the heart there? If it's not responsible for moving blood, I mean, it's doing this quote unquote pumping, but really it's not pumping, it's contracting. It's not this forceful pressure propulsion pump. It acts more like a hydraulic ram. But the reason that the heart is there is twofold, in my opinion. One is that if you look at the orientation of the muscle fibers of the heart, it's all the fibers or most of the fibers are oriented in a spiral-like nature. And there's actually one scientist from Spain named Francisco Torrent Quasp who has discovered that the heart muscle is actually one big band of muscle that's kind of wrapped up on itself. And so when it contracts, it does so it kind of twists and spirals, right? And that vortexes the blood or swishes the blood, spirals it around. And one of the ways that water gains energy, according to Dr. Pollack in his lab, is if we spiral that water in the presence of oxygen, or we vortex it in the presence of oxygen, which is what's happening because there's oxygen always present in the blood. Even the venous blood has oxygen, even though it's less than the arterial blood. But so the heart is vortexing that blood in the presence of oxygen, energizing the water so that when it gets out into the blood vessels, it can more readily structure itself onto the lining of the blood vessels and move the blood.
So kind of recharging.
Right. So in a way, you could say that the heart is responsible for moving the blood, just not nearly in the way that we think it is, right? And the heart does do some pumping. It does enough to kind of move the blood through the ventricles and the atria itself, but it can't really do much more than that. The other reason the heart is there is because it acts like a damming up organ, stopping the flow of blood. So if we were to do exercise and our tissues demanded more nutrients, oxygen and nutrients, to do that exercise, then what we see is the blood kind of forcefully go over to the arterial side to deliver nutrients to tissues and things like that. And if the heart wasn't there to stop the flow of blood, too much blood would go over to the arterial side and the venous side wouldn't maintain enough pressure and it would collapse. And that would result in very problematic things. We would probably die if that happens. So the heart, and there's plenty of research to show this, that it actually in times of exertion slows the flow of blood. And so athletes who have this hypertrophy of the heart, they think, oh, because it's pumping harder. No, the research actually shows that it's because it's more effective at stopping the flow of blood. So there's a bigger musculature to stop the flow of blood.
Right, so kind of that like pressure response.
Right, kind of like a backstop, and it's a bigger backstop because there's more flow coming through it. And so pretty fascinating, kind of turns things on its head. But it's very important to understand these things because, again, if we're trying to understand what goes wrong, especially things like heart failure, which is blamed on the heart not pumping enough or as well as it should. Well, what if the heart was never really designed to pump in the first place? What if heart failure is a breakdown of these other mechanisms of blood flow? And how do we address that? Because if we want to address that, we have to effectively know why that happens, right?
Yeah. So because we often talk about the endothelial lining as really the kind of the core of cardiovascular disease, right? That's where the plaque accrues and kind of the problem all starts there. But if we look at it from a different perspective and we'll get there, it's not cholesterol buildup, it's not this, not that. How is it that we can better protect that endothelial lining, better charge everything that needs to be pumped through the blood and not from a heart muscle perspective? So very, very interesting. So being that we talked about kind of the heart being in this spiral shape, kind of vortexing the blood, and there are some people out there, drinking charged water and getting barefoot on the earth. So would you say that that's another way to derive some of these electrical charges from our environment to further improve that fourth phase of water lining?
Definitely. Yeah. Then hopefully people are asking themselves, well, how do we structure the water? How do we energize the water in our body so that it can structure itself? Because it's not just the vortexing of the heart that does it. Water can gain energy from lots of different places. And in Pollack's lab, he found that far infrared light at the 3000 nanometer wavelength is the most absorbed by water. It doesn't mean that other frequencies of light can't also energize it, but that's the most absorbed by water. And so the most the natural source of infrared light is the sun. There's always infrared present, right? Sometimes there's also blue light there, more times or different times of the day, but there's always infrared and red light present, energizing the body. Now, the other thing is that putting your feet in direct contact with the earth, like exposing your skin to the correct electromagnetic fields, also energizes this water. And so one of the interesting things here is that not only does the water structure itself onto the lining of the arteries, but it also structures itself on the elements of the blood. So the red blood cells, the lipoproteins, anything that's in there really is hydrophilic. And there's really cool experiments with grounding that show that if you ground, you increase what's called zeta potential, which is that charge of water around the red blood cells. You increase zeta potential and you prevent clotting, and you increase blood flow. So grounding, incredibly important to gain those electrons from the earth and energize that water. But yeah, there's also other things as far as like, creating more structured water, energizing the water, as far as like avoiding different toxins, like glyphosate has been shown to definitely interfere with the formation of structured water, or non-native electromagnetic fields. So Wi-Fi and cell phones and those types of radiations have also been shown to deplete structured water, but also things that cause oxidative stress, heavy metals, plastics, fluoride, things like that can also break down the structured water. So we want to, eliminate those things from our life or decrease our exposure to those things as well. And all this stuff helping us increase structured water, but also therapeutically, we could do infrared sauna. If we want to get a more concentrated dose within, modern world, we could use infrared sauna to do that. And the studies on heart failure and infrared sauna are absolutely phenomenal as far as like the results they have for people with heart failure. So it just kind of drives home this theory or this idea of the heart not being the mover. If we increase the structured water of the blood, it creates blood flow and takes pressure off the heart, and heart failure gets better. I mean, the ejection fractions go up, heart size goes back down, edema goes down. Literally, these people, it changes their lives.
Wow. Yeah, I think it's really important to bring a different perspective to people so that they can be like, oh, you know what, maybe if I just changed a few things, get back out to nature, get back out in the sunshine, put your feet on the earth. I mean, we're humans. We have to accept that, if a house plant can't survive indoors, what makes us think that we can? We got to get outside, get in the sun, get barefoot. We're not meant to have rubber soles on our feet all day long. So we need to kind of just get back to nature, avoiding the toxic soup that unfortunately we can be living in. So I think that that's really important. And, getting rid of some of these toxins in our day-to-day life is going to help, of course, more than just the heart as well. But if you're up against cardiovascular disease and looking for new answers, this is something you really ought to consider. And so that's what kind of brings us back into the atherosclerosis and kind of, again, the crux of cardiovascular disease is how we can better protect the lining of the arterial wall, how we can prevent plaque formation, how we can prevent blood clots, and so on. I don't think that your body would produce something that's innately bad. So one of the large discrepancies between functional and conventional cardiology is the idea of cholesterol being so bad, and we just want to drive cholesterol down. You and I know, and I think we agree on the fact that we know cholesterol is absolutely essential. And I think that conventional cardiology recognizes and maybe just doesn't appreciate that so much. So how is it that we can further elaborate on the idea of cholesterol not being the problem when it comes to atherosclerosis?
Yeah. Yes, this is the big conversation around heart disease. And it's, if people don't know the backstory, I won't go into the full thing here, but, this cholesterol was kind of wrongly blamed for heart disease because, back in the 50s, everybody was worried about heart disease. It was this growing thing. And there was some bad science that was done that kind of pointed to cholesterol. But it was science that can't really prove anything. It's the lowest kind of science there is, epidemiology. And they came up with this theory and then heavily tested the theory after that. And the research they did showed that eating saturated fat and cholesterol doesn't cause heart disease, and actually eating more polyunsaturated fat is what caused it. However, the idea had already taken off and there was lots of money backing this idea. And so the idea that cholesterol causes heart disease kind of took off. And so if you look into the research, in my opinion, there's really no sound research that cholesterol causes heart disease, or that there's any instance in time where cholesterol says, you know what, I'm going to go embed myself into the lining of that artery just because that's what I do. Like, that just doesn't make sense. There's no real evidence for that. And to kind of put the cherry on top of that, when we analyze what cholesterol is or what plaque is, we actually take it and analyze what it is. It's clotting tissue.
Right.
The largest percentage of it. So like 87-90% of it is clotting tissue. And then there's other things. There's some calcium, there's some macrophages, there's white blood cells and things like that. And there's maybe some cholesterol present, but it's very small amounts, and a large amount of it is clotting tissue. And so, hopefully the natural question again is what causes clotting tissue to form on the lining of an artery? Right. What would do that? Well, what happens when you cut your skin? Right. A clot forms to stop bleeding. So what would make an artery bleed from the inside? And that's when we get damage to the lining of the artery. So we have to have damage present for the body, and we have to have it to an amount that the body can't repair it itself, to the point where the body says, well, we have to plug this up somehow, or else we're going to bleed into, because the arteries have blood vessels that feed the arteries, right? So they can start to bleed. And so then the body has to form clotting tissue there so that doesn't happen. And if we get more and more clotting tissue building up on it, we can get this narrowing of an artery. Now, whether or not that narrowing of an artery ever causes an issue as far as a heart attack, I think is subject to debate based on some research that I found. But the fact of the matter is if we want to prevent heart disease, we're overanalyzing these lipid panels, right? And some people would say that, oh, well, cholesterol doesn't matter, but if it's oxidized, or if it's your ApoB to ApoA1 ratio, or your LP little a, all these different subfractions of lipoproteins, that's what we need to analyze. However, I feel that that's only giving us a small indication of those subfractions are only giving us a small indication of if there's enough damage to be causing damage to the lining of the artery. So if oxidized LDL is present, yes, that could be a contributor to damage to the lining of the artery. But what causes oxidized LDL, or small dense particles, or whatever, is the same thing that's causing damage to the lining of the artery. So we're seeing them at the same time, right? It doesn't mean that that oxidized LDL is the major problem that's happening. It just means that there's damage in the line, or in the bloodstream, and it's damaging the line of the artery. So what can cause damage? That's the question.
Right.
And the answer is many, many things, lots of different things. So we talked about different toxins, heavy metals, endotoxins from endotoxemia, from poor dental health or poor gut health. There could be plastics, there could be psychological stress, definitely increases clotting factors and damages the lining of the artery. There could be stagnant blood flow, so pooling of blood. That's one way that, if there is atherosclerosis in the lining of an artery, it can change flow dynamics. We can interfere with that and create stagnant flow, which is a pro-clotting type situation. There's lack of sunlight. So lack of fourth phase water on the lining of the artery, making it more prone to damage, all kinds of things. And so it's really going back to, that kind of ancestral way of living and removing these toxins, putting yourself in contact with nature, eating whole animal foods and things like that, that are really going to help decrease this damage. And then I guess the kicker is the insulin resistance. That's something so there's supposed to be wear and tear on the arteries. That's why there's all these mechanisms, the fourth phase water, the glycocalyx, and all these things that protect it, because there's this normal wear and tear that's supposed to happen. However, we're supposed to be able to repair that. And insulin is the hormone that signals for growth and repair. And if we're insulin resistant, like, end stage is type 2 diabetes, but you can be insulin resistant well before that, then your body never gets that signal to repair. And then the artery is forced to do something like clot to repair that, so that's why insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes is so heavily associated with higher rates of atherosclerosis. So all these different things are what's really causing damage to the lining of the artery and clotting, and has very little, if anything, to do with cholesterol.
Right. Exactly. So it's inflammation and oxidative stress. Okay. And then we have to step back and do a little bit of detective work. And what is causing that? Is it you're consuming heavy amounts of glyphosate? You're maybe inhaling glyphosate, what have you, but you're exposed to these toxins that are producing the oxidative stress and inflammation that's thereby going to the arterial lining. And then you're getting some plaque, and cholesterol gets a bad rep.
Yeah, it gets framed.
Exactly. Exactly. So I think that, we have to, again, put on our detective hats and figure out exactly what it is that's in your lifestyle that's kind of producing that. So what is it, what kind, and I think I know, but what is it that you suggest in terms of nutrition to better improve and avoid cardiovascular disease? The Healthy Heart Show will be right back after we take this quick break to hear from our sponsor. Would you like to drink great tasting coffee that's also good for your heart health? Cardiology Coffee is your answer. This 5-star rated coffee is delicious. It's a gourmet coffee that begins with whole organic beans, hand-selected and carefully roasted. It's tested and certified to be free of pesticides, mold, and other toxins. Cardiology Coffee is great for your heart, and you're going to love how it tastes. Order now online at cardiologycoffee.com. Now back to the Healthy Heart Show.
Yeah. So, in my book, I talk a little bit about, how it makes absolutely no sense that all these nutrients we find in animal foods, if we take them out of isolation and we say, oh, look, is this beneficial for the heart? The answer is yes to many different things. So it makes no sense that, one aspect of this food is causing heart disease, but these other aspects are great for the heart. It makes no sense. But it's because, the saturated fat and stuff doesn't cause heart disease. So one thing to think about is that the heart, there's quite a bit of literature that suggests the heart prefers to burn fatty acids and ketones over glucose. And even in the presence of glucose, which, there's this thing called oxidative priority, which your body will usually burn glucose first, but it seems like in heart tissue, it prefers the fatty acids and ketones over the glucose. And so I think there's a reason for that. And so it makes no sense that saturated fats would be bad for us if that's what the heart prefers to burn as a fuel source and makes it more efficient. There's also really interesting stuff about collagen protein, as far as collagen's ability to increase antioxidant production in the liver, which will decrease the oxidative stress that causes the damage to the lining of the artery. But also collagen protein is the connective tissue matrix that literally goes throughout our entire body, all the way down to the level of the DNA, including the lining of an artery. It's very important for the structure and function and health of the lining of the artery. And so collagen protein is found in animal foods, the connective tissue parts of the animal foods. And then There's also nutrients like CoQ10, which is incredibly important for the health of the mitochondria in the heart, which the heart has some of the highest amounts of mitochondria of any organ or tissue in the body. CoQ10 is found, specifically in like heart, beef heart, things like that, but also liver and muscle meat and things. And then there's a slew of other nutrients like creatine and carnitine and carnosine and taurine, that are all very, very beneficial to the heart. So taurine is critical for the health of the lining of the artery and the endothelial cells. Carnitine is critical for the use of fatty acids by the heart, which is, again, its preferred fuel source. So taking those fatty acids and getting them into the mitochondria to burn. And then carnosine has actually been shown to help injured heart tissue heal, which is incredibly important, especially for people who have had heart attacks or have scarring on the heart for various reasons, whether chemical exposures or excessive endurance exercise, things like that. So yeah, we start to step back and look at all this. It makes no sense that these foods are driving heart disease when they're giving us so many critical nutrients to help the heart stay healthy and heal the heart if it gets damaged.
Right. And very few of what you mentioned, if any, are going to be coming from a plant-based diet. So
exactly,
we have to, we quite literally are what we eat. And if we want to maintain structural integrity, we have to consume these foods that are rich in these amino acids and collagens and so on. So it doesn't really add up to avoid all of these foods that we need to kind of pay into our cellular makeup.
Yeah. And actually, interestingly, you mentioned like plant-based, we're designed to use cholesterol. That is an animal fat, and but plants use phytosterol. And so if we eat a super high amount of plant fats, like in the form of vegetable oils, which are really high in these phytosterols, there's research that shows that if your body is forced to use high amounts of phytosterols, especially in red blood cells, it makes them more rigid. So when they're trying to get down to the capillaries and squeeze through these small little capillaries, they can actually cause damage and cause rupture, which can lead to stroke. And there's studies that show that the more phytosterols people eat, the more likely or more associated they are to having stroke in rats and then in people too. And also some of these phytosterols have been shown to deposit around the valves of the heart because the body can't do much else with them. Right. So the saturated animal fats are literally what we're supposed to have, at least in the higher amounts.
Yeah, our body knows what to do with them. It's more compatible. And so maybe that can segue us into talking about the collagen network of the body and some of this discussion about heart rate variability and coherence.
Yeah, for sure. This is kind of one of my favorite things because it's one of the most mind-blowing things I've figured out about the heart or read about the heart. And that is that the heart is there's a reason we say things like it's at the heart of the matter, right? Because, we kind of subconsciously recognize that the heart is kind of the center. It's what driving things, even though the brain, we think of as like this control center or whatever. Like we always say, we don't say it's at the brain of the matter. No. We say it's at the heart of the matter. And there's a reason for that. And that is because the heart has a really dense amount of mitochondria, and and because of the motion of the heart and those mitochondria creating an electromagnetic field, the heart's electromagnetic field is the largest of any organ in the entire body. And it's the only organ that has a big enough electromagnetic field that it can communicate to every single cell in the entire body. And so because of that, the heart is what largely sets the tone for what's called coherence in the body. And coherence is just when all elements of a system are synced up and communicating, and because they're communicating, are doing what's best for the system as a whole, right? Whereas incoherence would be a certain tissue or cell is unable to communicate, like a cancer cell, we could say. And if it's not communicating, then it's doing what's best for itself rather than what's best for the system as a whole. And so the heart is kind of what sets the tone for that. Okay. And there are many ways that the heart communicates this information. One, I mentioned electromagnetic field. And if people can't think that, the heart couldn't possibly communicate through an electromagnetic field, think about wireless technology. Like, people are communicating wirelessly all the time, and the heart has that same electromagnetic field, or a more compatible one. It's not the same as those, but it has a field that communicates. But also, lots of information from the heart is not just, it communicates not just through the fluid in the blood, but also communicating electricity and electromagnetism through the blood, because it's in a salt-based system with plenty of electrolytes that can conduct electricity through it. That's why we can do a electrocardiogram,
Right.
and it's why we can put the electrode on the toe and still pick up a signal from the heart, because it literally goes everywhere in the body. We can also pick up thermography and heat from the heart, or sound from the heart. The magnetic field, like lots of different things can be communicated through blood in that way. But another way that the body communicates, people think about the nervous system and how, we communicate that way, but actually the connective tissue network of the body of collagen, the fascia, the tensegrity system, the living matrix, there's lots of different names for it, is the collagen protein network that literally holds us together. And some people think of it as like this Spider-Man suit on top of us, but it's actually way more than that. It penetrates all the way down to the level of the cell's nucleus. So it's literally interweaves everything together. And the cool thing about collagen, especially collagen with structured water on it, is that it's what we call a semiconductor, which means that it can conduct lots of different information, lots of different types of information throughout the entire body. Okay. And the heart is what's communicating through this connective tissue network, the coherence of the body. It's kind of setting the tone, setting the beat, so to speak, so that everything's synced up. And so light, sound, electricity, protons, all these different things can communicate through this collagen network, which hopefully makes people realize how important this connective tissue network is, and how keeping it healthy is important, not just for, your structure and things like that, but also for the ability for your heart to communicate the coherence. Because if you got scar tissue somewhere, or you've got a stored past trauma somewhere in the tissue, which is definitely a real thing, then it can kind of block that communication, and the heart's trying to send it and it just gets blocked in that tissue. And so the way that it's no mistake that the way that we measure coherence in the body is heart rate variability. And heart rate variability is basically, it's the best measure of balance in the autonomic nervous system, but it's also this balance, or this indication of how coherent things are. And one example that I give, as far as like kind of proving this whole theory, is that when we affect scar tissue, when we affect collagen, when we do so in different ways, whether it's like different types of massage or chiropractic or these types of manipulation of the collagen network, we see increases in coherence through increases in heart rate variability.
Okay.
So it's really interesting to connect all that together and see how, proper health of the body is basically about communication. Right. Which you could say about anything. The proper health of a society is about proper communication. Everybody's on the same page doing what's best for the society as a whole. You can take that down to the body, down to the cellular level. You can take it all the way up to the universe, right? So it's kind of this beautiful thing, and it all takes us back to the heart, which is it's one of those things that the heart has taught me. In my study of how to figure out how it works, it taught me how life works, at a very high level. So it's pretty fascinating stuff. And, it's cool that we can measure it too, through heart rate variability. That's a very measurable thing that you can look at, and you can also like do things in your life and try to affect it and see if things are working. And it's all about this coherence and making sure your body is communicating.
That really is fascinating. So what are and again, as you say, what is the way that I can best improve my heart rate variability? And tracking it, segue into, would you suggest some of these like wearable devices to track the heart rate variability, and what your thoughts are on that?
Yeah. So heart rate variability can be improved in a lot of ways. So first of all, I'll kind of discuss what it is. So like if people, a healthy heart is actually not very steady. It's kind of going up and down. It's the heart rate variability. It changes from beat to beat. And a healthy heart changes from beat to beat, because you think about it like this, like if the heart was just kind of functioning on its own and not interacting with the environment and changing in response to its environment and things like that, it would just be this steady thing. There'd be nothing affecting it. So a healthy heart is indicative of change, the ability to adapt to your environment, right?
Resiliency.
And so, right. And so if you actually look at heart rate variability of a diseased heart, like a heart failure or something like that, it's actually very, straight line monotone kind of thing.
Okay.
And then if you look at normal healthy heart rate, like a healthy heart, it's kind of up and down, it's varying, right? Which is cool. And so ways that we increase heart rate, well, if we take the pulse on our wrist, and you take a deep breath in, you'll feel your pulse quicken if you pay attention. And then you take a slow breath out, you'll feel the pulse slow down. And so the difference between the fastest it gets when you breathe in and the slowest you get when you breathe out, it gets when you breathe out. That's called respiratory sinus arrhythmia. And it's another measure of heart rate variability. It's kind of the same measurement. And so it's the ability to go back and forth and adapt is what it is. And so there are devices you can get, like you mentioned, that can measure this heart rate variability, more of a number rather than just touching your pulse or whatever. And there's things like the Oura Ring or the BioStrap or Apple Watches and Fitbits and things will do it these days. I'm not too big on wearable tech. I don't want too many wireless devices around me. I do have the Oura Ring, but I just put it on at night when it measures heart rate variability, and I put it on an airplane mode so you can turn off the wireless signal from it. And I just let it measure that, and then I'll turn my phone and it back on in the morning, get the reading, and then take it off. I don't wear it during the day. I'm a chiropractor. I use my hands as a ring on there. It just kind of interferes with things. But I just don't like wearing this stuff anyways.
Well, and being that we're electromagnetic beings, we don't really need something on our body.
We don't want that all the time.
Right.
Yeah. So if I can turn that off at night and just have it measure that, then that's good. And the other thing is that, once you measure your heart rate variability for a week or two and you kind of get your baseline, then you know what it is. And you don't have to necessarily be monitoring it all the time.
Right.
You know what your baseline is. And then let's say you're going through a week of it's pretty stressful, or you started a new health hack or whatever, and you want to see if it affects that, then you can always put it on and start measuring it again and see, oh, well, it's better than my baseline, or I'm worse than my baseline or whatever, So that's kind of how I use it. I don't want to be completely a slave to the numbers, and just trying to treat the number rather than treat me and how I feel. If I'm wondering if it affects the number, I can always test that, but you got to get your baseline first. So that's kind of how I use it. And there's, so many different things that can affect heart rate variability. But some of the ones that I think are most impactful as far as decreasing it are unresolved past trauma is a big one. And people don't necessarily realize that. When I think about coherence and how heart rate variability is a measure of coherence and how stored past trauma in a tissue in the body, kind of somatic storage of it, that can definitely interfere with coherence. And the work of Peter Levine has definitely shown this type of stuff and how he helps people, process that and get it out of the body. Can definitely help with that. So if that's something that people want to look into, then somatic experience or some kind of trauma therapy like that could be helpful. But also we have to remember that when we're born, the nervous system and the baseline stress response of the nervous system has not been developed, like many things when we're first born. And so that's why we look at babies with these soft faces, and we give them reassuring safety signals, right? And that's what makes them happy, because we're training the nervous system as to what is safe,
right? Which
is why childhood trauma, especially in the first 6 to 12 months, is it's a huge issue, because that baby learns a different baseline of what's safe, and so they're more likely to get into that stress state and have this imbalance in the autonomic nervous system. And so we have to, so that's something to take into account if you're someone who's struggling with incoherence and poor heart rate variability and things like that. But those things can make huge differences. But just, the EMF environment, exposure to nature is huge, like minimizing EMFs and exposing yourself to more nature. Like those coherent sounds and signals and all the stuff we get from nature are what we evolved in for millions of years. And it makes sense that would be the signals that tell ourselves that it's safe, right? And it's just ironic that some people these days would actually get a stress response from being in nature because they're so scared of it. They're so far removed from it. And that just goes to show that our brains are unlike any other animal on the planet, and that we can think our way into a stress response and think something bad's going to happen to us because of preconceived notions or other things that we've seen. And when in reality, our body, those are the sounds that are most normal to our body. So it's really interesting. The humans are really interesting in that sense, and how we're completely removed from that and have different, a whole different brain capacity. But there's lots of different things, like even like cold exposure or splashing your face in cold water can increase heart rate variability, or just, if I think about the stresses in life that can have a negative effect on heart rate variability, the stresses that make you feel like you're in unpredictable situations or you're out of control are the ones that are most detrimental to health. So we can all think about COVID and what that must have done for people, like all this mess that was going on. But studies show that it's those types of stresses that are are the most detrimental to heart rate variability, and lead to the worst health outcomes. But stresses are good if we feel like we're in control of those. Like you could be a CEO of a company in control of everything, just tons of stress. You're busy all the time, but you're fine because those are stresses you control. Whereas if you're lower down in a company and you got, an insecure job or insecure pay or, insecure hours, different things like that, and you just don't know what's coming day to day, that's very stressful. And those are the types of stresses that have a negative impact on these things. So, lots of different stuff, and we could talk on and on about it, but that's.
I was going to say the issue of the stored trauma within the fascia and kind of this almost like emotional scarring on the body is just, we could run on that on its own, which is just really fascinating. So it's like, I have patients that, I've got this, old shoulder problem. It's, well, is it an injury? No, I'm just holding. And then if you work back through the emotional history of that individual, it's, I was holding something, and kind of, it's just really interesting the way humans work and the way humans store even emotions within that.
Well, that's network. the whole phenomena of going through shock. If something traumatic happens to you, is the body processing that shock or processing that trauma. And if you don't let it do that, because it's not necessarily a harmful thing, it's got to go through that shaking, that body movement. That's why it's involved. And unfortunately, Western medicine is to suppress that response. So someone's going through that, they try and suppress it, and that's when trauma can get stored. So it's very interesting. So, and then, to treat it, you can either, and Peter Levine and others have, methods of doing this, of walking people through things like mentally, emotionally, and uncovering that trauma and figuring out where it is in the body. But also you hear stories of practitioners like massage therapists and things who go through a tissue or whatever, and all of a sudden the patient has this emotional response, and it's their release. It's just the release of it, so it could be either way. You could do it from the emotional side or the physical side, and to kind of release that trauma, but hugely impactful when it happens.
And would you say, so if you are working on some sort of, be it chiropractic or some sort of body work that you're working through this, you really have to work through it emotionally as well, because you're digging up old trauma, and so you still have to process it, because sweeping it under the rug the first go around didn't pan out very well. So you really kind of have to be prepared to deal with it and address it at that point in time, I would think. Yeah,
for sure. And if, like as a chiropractor, if I'm adjusting someone and doing different modalities and I'm only getting so far, it's always a question I have to ask, like with this person, like, hey, are there any, past traumas that you feel like are still affecting you? Or even if they don't feel like they are, maybe they're stored somewhere. So that's something you're going to have to address and get them to the right person to figure that out, or give them the right tools to figure that out themselves,
Cool. Well, I think we're at the end of our time here, but again, we could go on. And I think that we've brought up a lot of really interesting topics. I know that I could go in depth with a lot more of these and just ask away, but thank you so much for joining us today. Please let our listeners know where they can find more about you, where they can get your book, and keep the topics rolling.
For sure. Yeah. My website is resourceyourhealth.com. And, I run my kind of health consulting, online health consulting business through there. And my books are on there, and I have a blog on there, so people can check that out. I'm on social media. It's just Dr. Stephen Hussey, Dr. Stephen Hussey. So people can contact me on there, and I'm always posting my latest findings and fun stuff on there, so people can keep up with that. My books are on Amazon, but they're also on the publisher's website if people don't want to use Amazon. So lots of different places to find me.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. I know I will continue to follow along. Thank you for all your work and everything you continue to share with us. I appreciate your time.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
That does it for today's episode. Thanks so much for listening to The Healthy Heart Show. Please help us get the word out by liking and subscribing to our podcast and our Facebook page, Natural Heart Doctor. Please show support for our podcast sponsor, Cardiology Coffee, your resource for organic, antioxidant-rich, mold and pesticide-free coffee shipped straight to your door. Learn more by adding @cardiologycoffee on Instagram and visiting cardiologycoffee.com. This podcast provides materials for information and educational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. We encourage you to contact your physician for any of the health issues discussed here.